Join me, Mark Windows, for Windows on the World live every Sunday 9 to 11 p.m. GMT. Check out our archive and programme stream at windowsontheworld.net.
Welcome to the show. Tonight I'm going to go into an area which is very important, and it carries on from the shows we've been doing recently. You know, those shows about the useful idiots of the protest movement, which is not a protest movement, called Extinction Rebellion. The way that change agents, these global change agents for global governance, are actually infiltrating everywhere, and they have been since about 2010 in this country. Obviously, it goes on further back than that, but the announcement of the Big Society by David Cameron kind of coincides with all this rolling out. Of course, it's not a coincidence. It was all very well planned. And we actually go into that in our talks, the bigger picture. Now, on this show, we're going to lead up to something which is very important, and it's about the taking of assets, the grabbing of land. This is the next stage of what's going to be going on with these same activists, they're actors, these Extinction Rebellion type activists who are embedded in many other NGOs and, of course, in many other fake protest groups. Now, we have people every week sending stuff in, and it's absolutely fascinating because, yes, it's one template, a template that's being rolled out everywhere. These people use all of the same issues. They use everything that the UN Global Action Plan of taking land, property, assets, and the control of people into their agendas. This is what they put into all of their agendas. And the climate emergency is being imposed by these state-controlled drones, masquerading as protesters, are being enforced everywhere. Why are governments listening to them? Because this is the latest plan to get the public to go along with their own extinction. The wiping out of not only their rights, not only their property, but also themselves. Ooh, this sounds like a right-wing conspiracy theory, doesn't it? That's what those drones would say. These are the Epsilon drones, the ones described as in Brave New World, you know, the ones that had to be reprogrammed now and again to keep them within the narrowing corridor of political correctness and opinion. You know that narrow corridor, the one we're not allowed outside of? You know that narrow corridor, the one that gets you banned from speaking about anything outside it? That's the one I'm talking about, yeah. Great quote here from Charles Fort. He was a kind of a philosophical sort of chap who spent most of his time in the late 1800s to the early 1900s looking at libraries and the strange, anomalous stories that were to be found in books, journals and newspapers. And he put them all together into the complete works of Charles Fort. He wrote many books. One of his great quotes is, "The earth is a farm, we are someone else's property." Now, after all his lifetime of study and looking at the world, he came to the conclusion that yes, we were being controlled by something other than a government. In other words, there's a bigger plan to all this, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger the more you start looking at it. And the more you look at it, the more you realise the less you know. And the people who are used by the state are people who think they know everything because they've been programmed into this narrow corridor, which is what the education system is all about. Remember, the idea of education is to prevent change in the individual, as described in our shows about education as indoctrination. That was in a book by Alexander English called The Principles of Secondary Education. It was basically to stop people being able to change, and it assumed that people would start to deteriorate mentally as soon as they left school. Well, I don't know about you, but my mental capacity increased greatly as soon as I left. Maybe I'm a conspiracy theorist for saying that, though. But let's get on to the new totalitarian system, the one we've been talking about for quite some time, and the one that is ever more apparent. Under this system, which has been going on since about the 1500s, we talk about feudalism here, and really the things that are going on now are a modern form of feudalism and getting people to accept that modern form of feudalism. In other words, they have to consent to it because black magic requires consent, and in a way this is a kind of black magic because in order to give yourself up to the state and not be a divine human being anymore, you have to become property. and you are coerced into signing away your children through the Birth Certificate and the Registrations Act. But previous to that, there was a thing called a Certificate of Settlement. It meant you couldn't go from one county to another without producing the certificate. And if you were found to be vagrant, couldn't support yourself, or you had a bit of a run-in with the local beak, they could put you into the workhouse where you would get benefice. So the benefit of the society would be that you could be put into the workhouse, imprisoned in the workhouse, to see the error of your ways and basically be a useful tool of the state. Of course, they're doing this in prisons now. They're turning prisons into places where people go to work. And as private prisons increase in size, and that's what's going to happen in the UK, the prisons in London are closing down, like Pentonville's going to close, and that's going to be flats. And then all of these prisoners are going to be taken out to more remote areas and put into super prisons where they will be given work to do. That's why we're being told that the prison system is breaking down, because we're going to be told very soon that super prisons are going to be built and they're going to be much more humane, and the others were old and Victorian and they're falling apart and all the rest of it. However, let's look at the poor laws of the 1500s, which actually took away a lot of our inalienable rights and brought in these sort of rules, these laws, which have now become enacted into statute through statute through statute and get rolled out in every area of our life, even in our interactions with all state agencies. Now, if this sounds a little esoteric, take a look at some of our previous shows. You can sit there and listen to them. Hopefully they're quite easy to listen to. They're very information filled, but we've been doing a lot on this stuff for quite a long time. But it's merely an update of the poor laws. What we're talking about, this new system of global governance and totalitarianism, is just an update of the old feudal system, but it's a global feudal system with a technocratic kind of rollout. In other words, yes, they didn't have the Internet of Things in the 1500s, but they could still find you if they wanted to know where you were. So we're going a bit more updated here. But by 1990, for instance, the UN, that's the United Nations, had extended its rollout of registration through the birth certificate to every country. And let's have a look at what the registration of the person is before we get into this, because it goes into our rights, our inalienable rights, which have been removed under these UN charters and under global governance. So the registration of the person under the UN Human Rights Act states that everyone has rights as a person before the law. So a person, however, in law is defined as property and can be conveyed. Now, this is neither a good or bad thing. In essence, it just means that when we go into a court of admiralty or a court of commerce, that we can actually put everything down on paper and everything on that paper can be conveyed. However, under the system of the UN Agenda 21, it means that we are property because we are deemed to be, as the new UN Global Action Plan states, that everything, all assets on the earth are then under this global governance, and we are assets, we are energy, and we are deemed to be property. So this is very interesting. And the courts of admiralty, for instance, this way of kind of conveying people as property, or using the laws of the sea, which is all about commerce, basically, have been in existence since the 1200s. Have a look at an article on Windows on the World called "Are You a Pauper?" And there's several other articles that you can look through which go into the birth certificate. There's links on that article. But through many more laws, the undoing of inalienable rights was a slow but methodical destruction of rights, the rights that we have taken to be inalienable. And a lot of people still think we have inalienable rights. I spoke to a young lawyer recently and she said, you don't have inalienable rights. If a lawyer's telling you that, it tells you one thing about lawyers: don't use a lawyer, because they're the people who will basically get you put in prison for council tax and all that sort of thing. They may advise you how to deal with things like that, but when it comes to the court, they are officers of the court. And if the court is about transferring property, then you are property as soon as you're in that court if you are legally represented. You have to know how not to be property. This is all beyond the scope of what we're talking about here. But we're going to look really at the bigger picture, as usual. The intellectual lunacy which is behind all this was described in an article on Windows on the World called New Age Global Governance. And it goes into where this system, this new totalitarian system, this Agenda 21, Agenda 2030 UN Global Action Plan actually came from. And it came out of crazy ideas like the noosphere. We covered all this in a show, New Age Global Governance, so have a listen to that because it goes into this stuff. But basically, the idea of a noosphere was a mind sphere, or the Earth's mental sheath. And this is where all this idea of Gaia and worshipping the Earth actually came from. It was kind of a dual perception that life on Earth is a unity constituting a whole system known as the biosphere, and that the mind or consciousness of life, the Earth's thinking layer, constitutes a unity that is discontinuous but coexistensive, I didn't know coexist, I would have said, with the entire system of life on Earth. And it's inclusive of its inorganic support systems. Now, what they did with all this kind of philosophical kind of word salad, is that they incorporated it into law. And they incorporated it into the climate change acts which have come in. And that was 2008, I think, the Climate Change Act. But this is a whole load of legislation that came in from the 60s and 70s right through the 80s. And that goes into a thing called the Wildlands Project. And it's based on the works of the biosphere and the noosphere theories, as well as on Julian Huxley's writings. And basically, it was that created the International Union for the Preservation of Nature in 1948. And that's since been transformed into the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. Okay. Now, Huxley identified in 1948, no less, the anthropocentric origin of global warming and climate change. And this has been around, as we say, for a while, as you can see. And it's not just an invention of the Club of Rome crisis think tank, who said that in looking for a new enemy, they're going to use climate change. So this predates that, and it goes right back to the 30s and 40s, the 1930s and 1940s. But basically, let's go forward to what's going on now and the whole purpose of this show. Let's go forward to the Rio Earth Summit in 1992, which brought together the policies of climate change as a corporate feudal system which was to take over the world. And under this new UN system, all land, assets, people, ideas, actions, beliefs and energy are property of the state. That's what it's all about. It's control of everything. And this is called the common good. So in other words, it's for the collective good. So no individual rights exist, which means having your own property, which means having anything of your own. However, the dichotomy here is that it's not for the common good. It's for the common good of corporate interests and global governance and banks. That's the common good. So that's the irony of the whole thing. So anyone who's protesting for this stuff and talking about the common good is talking about the common good of the World Bank, the IMF, the International Conservation Bank, and of course all of the NGOs who feed off this and implement it, and of course all the government officials who are on the gravy train to take away your rights. Now, it's a totalitarian system, and anything outside this ideology is demonised and shut down. Yes, to even mention it, you're a right-wing conspiracy theorist. But basically, the UN Global Biodiversity Assessment of 1995 concluded that the Earth's biological resources are under serious threat. The damage done today, it says here, largely as a result of human activities, get this, will limit the range of options that people will have in the future. And blame is attributed to religions for being in denial of the sacred attributes of nature. So this is why there's a war on religions, especially Christianity, in this country and in Europe. Because in order to get people into the global governance model, they need them to believe in the global governance religion, which is worship the earth for the sake of global interests in the common good, which is to take away all your rights, all your property, and then to genocide you when the time comes. In this country, it was called the Liverpool Care Pathway. They say it doesn't exist anymore, but they're still doing it. So don't go into hospital if you're over 65 is my advice. But don't take that as legal advice, obviously. But in this kind of lunacy that they rolled out to all this stuff I'm talking about, the noosphere, the biosphere, all etc., it states things like reincarnation from rocks to people is possible, right? Now, the reason they're saying all this is they're going to make areas sacred. They're going to be shutting off lots of land. And it's already happening all across America and indeed in the UK. Have a look at the way land is being redesignated, being called wetlands, for instance. There was a thing called the Ramsar Treaty in the early 1970s, which designated huge areas of land as basically wetlands, which could be liable to flooding. So they had to be closed off, you see. And this goes into the very core of Agenda 21. It's a land grab on the back of conservation. So in our show we did, it was called The Fourth World. Now look that up on Windows on the World. There's a good article with it as well. We included the video testimony of George Hunt, and he put a video on YouTube. He was there at the 1992 Earth Summit, and he couldn't believe what he was hearing about what these bankers and so-called elites. When we're talking about elites, we're not talking about elite thinkers. We're talking about people who are very clever and cunning, and they roll everything out as though it's a benefit. But in actual fact, it's to take away your rights and to give them more control. Because after a while, when you've got enough money, you don't need any more, do you? It's about control. You don't want the plebs getting out of hand. And that's always been part of the eugenics movement, things like Planned Parenthood, people who were working for that Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Huxleys, of course, and all of these people who are involved in this benevolence, a bit like Edmund de Rothschild and Stephen Rockefeller, all these people who were implementing this, and they're basically called billionaire philanthropists, like Bill Gates, who wants to reduce the population through vaccination. They're all billionaire philanthropists, you see. So what do you do when you're a billionaire? Well, you start socially engineering the planet, don't you, I suppose, because you feel that you are in a position to do that because you must be special because you've got this amount of money. And it's all about social Darwinism. I talked about this on the Richie Allen show. So basically, this Rio Earth Summit of 92, it brought together the sort of policies of climate change as a corporate feudal system, which was to take over the world. And yes, it's happened. So in our show, The Fourth World, yes, this guy George Hunt, who was at the Rio conference, he put out a video, and it's called The Elite Plan Well Ahead, in brackets UN, UNCED, United Nations, CED, Earth Summit Conference, 1992, George Hunt. Put that into YouTube. Yes, it's still there, and have a listen to it. Now, the climate change agenda was brought to the UN by Maurice Strong, an international globalist criminal, and he got standing to be head of all this stuff, especially the Agenda 21 policies. Just look him up. Look at his lengthy CV. That's Maurice Strong. And, of course, Edmund de Rothschild. Now, the speeches by these two globalists are included in those shows, and they're very, very interesting. Now, Edmund de Rothschild, whether he'd had a few glasses of champagne before he took to the stage, I don't know. But he said with all sincerity that it was a really good idea to spray some dry ice on the North Pole to cool it down. I think he knew at the time what this was about. This is about the bankers basically seeing a massive chance for a land grab to own more and more and more, and to have more power, and to get more from governments all over the world, and to bankrupt any government that doesn't go along with this agenda. That's what it's all about. If you're not green enough, then you are going to be bankrupted. And that's really the aim of what this global agenda, the UN Agenda 2030, is all about. So, yes, climate change agenda, the Fourth World Wilderness. Now get this, the Fourth World Wilderness, which came out of this conference in 1992, will be called the wilderness of the mind, the lostness of the mind. Basically, the collective consciousness. What do we see at the moment? Collectivism. Absolute collectivism. Anything outside this collectivism is deemed to be a far-right conspiracy theory, or anti-Semitic, or fascist, or even neo-Nazi. So there you go. That's how simple it is for the whole thing to work. Very simple, very effective. Why can't the public see through it? Because they've not been given the references as to how it was created. I've just given you them now. So basically, the Fourth World Wilderness, the lostness of the mind, the collective consciousness. So People will be brought into this world hive mind concept. This was the idea, by using the New Age, which has really worked well because that's the Gaia hypothesis, worship the earth, new form of neo-paganism. Drugs, of course, will be used. This is the old Soviet system of introducing drugs wherever you want to actually take over a society and degenerate it first. You remember, you have basically demoralization, and then you get the whole of the degeneration of society, then you get the crisis, and then you get the normalization of society. So this is how these stages of operation work. And a lot of people don't get this because they think in terms of their own tiny little lives and their tiny little environment. Well, we're talking about globalists here. We're talking about people who see the big picture, but it's not the bigger picture that we talk about in our talks. It's their big picture. We talk about the big picture that's being enforced on us by them. So basically, the global system collectivist agents and useful idiots describe anything outside of this controlled narrative as a right-wing conspiracy theory. Now, even the social cleansing in the City of London and the land grabs by, say, the likes of Bechtel and Lend-Lease are termed a conspiracy theory by those who are actually paid to impose the agenda. And we've reported on this before, but I think it's worth going through it again. Now, this is also the plan for the country, the whole country, which will be out of bounds. The countryside, yes. Nature, where you want to go to get into the country. The idea of all this is to take that away and fence it all off so you don't have rights to go anywhere. And that's what this show is all about, because I'm going to give you a bombshell, which is something which is a follow-on from Extinction Rebellion, which I found out about today through some brilliant people who send me stuff every week. And it's linked into the people who take over the fracking sites. It's linked into the people who took over Occupy. It's linked into Climate Camp Action, which took the Occupy money, which basically then carried on into things like Reclaim the Power, another drone fake activist group. And they're all linked, of course, to Extinction Rebellion. And we've proved all that. And even Gail Bradbrook, the grandmother of Extinction Rebellion. Gail, she's that person who tries to look a bit alternative by putting a ring through her nose, but she looks like she should be working as a civil servant. These people are quite easy to spot after a while. But basically, the whole of the country under this plan would be out of bounds to the public under sustainable development. Now, when I lived in a borough in North London called Waltham Forest, it's in North East London, there was a guy who turned up one day, and all of a sudden he was cabinet member for the environment. He started implementing draconian policies. Until now, that area looks like a concentration camp. And go to our article, Big Society Change Agents, and you will see what I mean. Closing of all roads. And now you've got this thing called School Streets, which is all instigated on Facebook to close all the streets off around schools. So every single street, apart from two main roads, are going to be closed, creating a traffic jam on the two main roads, which is going to cause more pollution. And the answer to all that is, remember the problem, the reaction and the solution. So the answer to all that is to ban all cars from the borough, and that's the way it's going. So if you like to drive a car, this is definitely not the gig for you. Agenda 21 is definitely not up your street. But the useful idiot Clyde Lokes, I sent him a show that we did called London's Dystopia, Public Winning Fight Back. Now, the show was about social cleansing and featured many well-known speakers, including a chap called Gordon Peters. Yes, he was the Gordon Peters who successfully challenged the Haringey Council sell-off of 50% of the borough to Australian property asset and management company Lend-Lease. He challenged them in the High Court, and it all had to be stopped. And so that's what this talk was all about. I filmed and recorded the talk for my friend in Leighton, who is a very good activist who sends me a lot of stuff from the local newspapers, so thanks to her, she's great. And she put on this meeting for local people. And it wasn't, guess what, the action group, the local direct action group, which is usually set up by change agents in the council to control the narrative and bring in the agenda. No, this was set up by people who were actually the real community. So I sent this to Clyde Lokes, cabinet member for the environment, and I sent it to him because it had all of this information about this corporate takeover of everything under Agenda 21, and of course people who were like housing officers were there. A housing officer from Haringey with 30 years experience says, well, I don't understand all this high density housing. The density is ridiculous. It's the sort of density you'd get above Victoria Station. Why is it out in the middle of Wanstead Marshes, the flats there? Why? Why are they doing this? Well, the answer is because they are getting everybody into cities. By 2050, the UN want everybody, or 2/3 of the world's population, into cities. That's quite a lot of people, isn't it? So, yes, I sent Mr. Lokes this very in-depth talk, and it wasn't all about what I was saying. In fact, I didn't say anything on it. I just introduced the show with a little précis about what was happening globally. He obviously didn't listen to it because he sent me back this response. And this is what we're up against. Hello, Mark. Thank you for your email and for taking the time to contact me. However, as I don't subscribe to the hugely discredited and laughable conspiracy theories that suggest there is an Agenda 21 takeover of the world, I'm afraid I find it of no value whatsoever. Yours, Clyde, Councillor Lokes. So I wrote back to him and I said this. Councillor Lokes, you clearly wish to ignore the public meeting held last week at the Epicentre in Leytonstone, whose speakers are featured in the show. Your patronising and uninformed response clearly shows you have not listened to or considered the information presented on behalf of the constituents in your borough. Which part of the factual information in the show is a conspiracy theory? Question mark. The people featured in the show are council officials, including those who have stopped the corporate takeover in Haringey, and by dismissing the content you are openly acting against the public interest. The truth about Claire Cober, she was head of Catley Council, is conveniently a conspiracy theory for those with their noses in the corporate trough. All right, that's a bit of a dig about him. But the point is that this Claire Cober had to back down on what she'd said, and then, like all of the useful idiots, she then said, oh, they're all sexist and they're ganging up on me. You know, the usual crap identitarian rubbish that these people come out with. But the facts about her resignation are clearly presented in the show, I said to Mr. Lokes, by those who stopped the HDV, including Gordon Peters. The show is actually about what is happening in the borough, of which you are a big part and getting paid very well for it. Remember, this is his borough, Waltham Forest. And I carry on. I had this conspiracy theory nonsense from lobbyists in Waltham Forest. They now know that this is the policy of local authorities and a national and global issue. The fact that the PR-led and journalist-free media do not report it cannot undermine the factual and well-referenced information. As you are aware, Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030 is a global action plan implemented at a local level. You yourself stated that this is not just happening in this country, but all over Europe, so you know that it is part of a bigger picture, and that's the point. He knows what it is. And so I said, are you saying that the 40 chapters of Agenda 21 are a conspiracy theory? I challenge you to find any deficiency in the information I have presented. I also challenge you to a public debate in front of the public in your borough who you state that you represent. Your patronising response is an insult to the quality of information contained in the show. No holds barred there, eh? Signed, me. Now, I had no response to that whatsoever because these people in public cannot argue. They can only use ad hominem arguments and strawman arguments. In other words, attach your factual information to something that's not true. As in, I suppose you think that the Earth's flat and Elvis's brain is on the moon. These are the sort of things that they put back at you. Now, we had the same thing with the Green Gathering, which is another Agenda 21 funded organisation, and they did the same ad hominems to us. And they said things like, we were banned from this, and we weren't even speaking at the Green Gathering. We were talking at tent which was owned by somebody else within the Green Gathering. So this is how draconian these people are, and you can see that in our video, which was basically banned by Green Gathering. And we filmed that at another festival we were at, a smaller festival. So basically we were banned from the Green Gathering, and you can find that on YouTube. But this is what they said, these idiots from the Green Gathering. While it has always been and remains the policy of the Green Gathering to platform diverse speakers, diverse meaning everyone within the accepted corridor of opinion, which they are allowed to basically roll out, because these people are all mind controlled and under the control of who funds them. We have to remember that, because they actually say that in their letter to us. It says basically, yes, diverse speakers, activities and entertainment. Our charitable status does require limits to what we might perform. One of the key objectives of the charity is education for sustainability and transition, meaning the implementation of these land grab agendas and the taking away of all your human rights. So basically, those people at the green gathering are not green at all. They're all on a green gravy train, a bit like Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth, who we've also talked about. Remember, everything is full of these gatekeepers, these trained drones of the state. And if that sounds like a conspiracy theory, go and try and debate one of them. Absolutely fascinating. And they carry on. While that may encompass many viewpoints, the key objectives of the charity, and of course their diverse platform, while that may encompass many viewpoints, speakers on human impact on climate change denial and conspiracy theories regarding, it says here, some well-established international environmental policy initiatives undermine the educational objectives of the charity in the event. And then they went on to say that Pia's position is well documented and a minority view in comparison with the consensus of the IPCC. And of course, there is no consensus. There's no actual consensus with science. Science can never reach a consensus, otherwise it's not science, is it? It's not something proven by fact. And the IPCC are not a scientific body, and their models and projections have never come true. And even Extinction Rebellion have exaggerated upon and lied about the IPCC. Go to the Global Warming Policy Foundation and have a look at their document, their letter of complaint to the BBC. And it outlines in that document what the IPCC actually says. In other words, there's been no rise in extreme weather events over the last 100 years, and they're way off with their mad predictions about the warming as well. And remember, it's the IPCC that are imposing these draconian agendas. So if they say it's not true, then, well, it must be slightly exaggerated, mustn't it, really? And basically, we wrote back with a really long letter, which was calling them out on the lies and the crap that they wrote, and they didn't respond to that. So what happens is, with these useful idiots, is that you will confront them, give them the evidence, then they will ignore it or basically just discard it. So this is very, very important. So that was talking about the way that these people are controlling the narrative of public opinion. Good couple of examples there, which I think is important. But we've got to remember that all of this imposition and this global governance template was talked about by a Dr. Richard Day in 1969 at an informal meeting at the Pittsburgh Pediatric Society to a bunch of students. Now, you can look at that on YouTube. It's called The New Barbarians, and it's a series of tapes with an interview by somebody who was actually at that meeting, and he took some notes and he basically describes what's happened ever since, up to and including the craze for jogging and people wearing training shoes, but more importantly, the way that society's been engineered into what it is now. And I haven't got time to go into all that, but we did 2 shows called Social Engineers Then and Now, and Social Engineers Creating Confusion, and all of the information of what this Dr. Richard Day, who worked for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, or as it was known then, Planned Parenthood, and the Rockefellers, this is what he said. And the interesting things about what he said was there's no other way. What he meant by that was that he knew that only a small proportion of people would believe it, and even smaller proportion of people would act upon the information they were given. And he was right there. However, the UN Agenda 2030 Global Action Plan, implemented by the banks and, of course, the NGOs all over the world, and it's in your local council through ICLEI, I-C-L-E-I, which is Local Government for Sustainable Development. Look that one up. All of this is on the back of what Dr. Richard Day was saying. And if people think this is environmental and it's good for the planet, well, they need to do a bit more reading. But social engineers then and now on social engineers creating confusion, and the talks yet are available as the new barbarians on YouTube. But basically, the useful idiots enforcing the global totalitarianism are in every part of public office and organising all the fake protests. Anything that gets on TV, any protest that gets on TV is not a real protest, because the real protests don't get on television. That's a fact. Because I know people who are actually working and uncovering these fake protesters all over the country. And in actual fact, there's not that many of them, but there doesn't need to be, because they're highly effective at what they do, because no one questions it. A bit like Dr. Richard Day was saying in 1969, people don't know the right questions to ask. And that's really important. But basically, after covering the Useful Idiots programmed by these principles in our recent shows about the UN and World Bank-backed Extinction Rebellion pantomime, the state and their controlled agents' opposition groups are really now going for it. There's a climate emergency which will happen sometime, somewhere in the future. There's a mass extinction. We know this because actors and those who have completely misrepresented the sources of this information have told us this and repeated it. The UN, IPCC and the NGOs and lobbying groups controlling the narrative are all in place to enforce these draconian agendas. Basically, facts are thin on the ground in what is now called the post-truth world. In fact, pretty much nothing that Sir Richard Attenborough reads off his auto cue and script on the BBC on behalf of the totalitarian agenda has any evidential basis. So the response from the drones of the Brave New World to this letter of complaint by the Global Warming Policy Foundation, the lies in this BBC Climate Change the Facts documentary and this series that he's doing on Netflix, have basically been ignored by these people. I posted it on one of these Facebook groups, and guess what? It was a right-wing conspiracy theory. Well, I never. Who'd have thought, eh? Who'd have thought that the evidence was now right-wing? Who'd have thought that facts are right-wing? Well, when you look at what's been funded, the Soros groups of the extreme fake far left, then that probably is right, isn't it? Because if anything's right-wing, it probably is right now, according to them. So, yes, basically, the interesting point about all this as well is that Dr. Richard Day, in his lecture, said, people are saying this is communism. He said, no, this is much bigger than communism. He's absolutely right. It's a global, unstructured governance that cannot be defined by the public. So it's much bigger than communism. And it's much bigger than communism because people don't know what it is. And it's being enforced on them through the climate change agenda. So world government is structureless in the eyes of the public. That's the really important thing. They're not trained to see it. The term world government is a misdirection for those who know a little about the governance system. And for those who don't, it's a conspiracy theory. Now, those forming this unstructured world government will take away all redress within the system and remove inalienable rights. This governance is like a spider's web of organisations which the public have no idea work together. That's what we put out in our shows, The Bigger Picture. That's what we put out every week on Windows on the World in some aspect or other. In our talks and a forthcoming audio book, I've put all this information in there very simply. Not a word is wasted, I guarantee that. And that's going to be available within the next few months. So the social engineers have now created a two-polar world. It's a bipolar world where there are those in the collective hive mind and those who are not. Every week we report on the NGOs and they're trained like their puppets, the personnel who are paraded on the mainstream with their implanted sound bites. And so let's take this for an example, and this has been big over the last couple of weeks, when the likes of this Jess Phillips MP openly state that they would be a good Prime Minister. And when you hear what she says, and a stupid inward-looking narcissism and identity politics revolving around the fact that she's a woman, and of course it's all about feminism, and of course it's all about someone who tweeted that he wouldn't rape her, and it's all about this kind of narrow narcissistic belief in oneself. When she turns around and said, I'd make a good Prime Minister, it's clear that mental midgetry and the collective corridor of narcissism and identity politics has basically taken over every part of public office. Now, nothing of any importance is discussed in any state-backed media outlet now. And that's really been a big thing that's happened over the past 10 years. But when Evelyn de Rothschild stated that spraying dry ice in the North Pole would be a good idea to keep it cool, I don't think even he would have thought there would be so many idiots taking on this new feudal system of complete enslavement through the mitigation of an apocalypse that he knows very well will never happen. Also, he stated in a remark that he knew that all of these renewables would never work. They're not meant to work. That's the whole point. The whole system is meant to fail. And that's what is the genius, the evil genius behind it, if you like. But we're more likely to be hit and wiped out by a comet than the predictions of the computer models and the fraud which come from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Before I get on to the next bit, I've got a great quote. The whole aim of practical politics is to keep the populace alarmed and hence clamorous, to be led to safety by menacing it with a series of hobgoblins, all of them imaginary. That was by H.L. Mencken, an American journalist, essayist, satirist, a cultural critic and scholar of American English. You don't get many of those these days. So the threat of a new apocalypse is created so the public willingly consent to loss of all rights, financial ruin and depopulation, and that is what's coming. They are not only believing it, they are crying out for it as a solution. So the depopulation agenda is a big part of it. It includes the control of people, property, land, all resources, energy, belief and reality. It encompasses all that. So let's be clear what the public are being programmed into. A technocratic order with a self-policing population run with corporate efficiency through control of all people, land, assets and energy, through a strict rationing system and drastic population reduction. It seeks to control the narrative of all public opinion through social engineering, a bigger global impact than 9/11. It affects every action of every human being on the planet. It's an apocalyptic cult based on humans being a blight on the planet and causing climate change. It's imposed by consensus through change agents, NGOs and think tanks, and more importantly, the World Bank and the IMF. And of course, the International Conservation Bank. It is big business. And here is an interpretation of the terms which are used by these social engineers. Social justice. Let's have an interpretation of that. It means collectivism over individual rights. It means loss of all rights. Social justice will throw many people into prison. Empowerment. That just means divide and rule. Creating minority groups to attack other minority groups and other people. Vibrant communities. Basically means a surveilled human settlement zone. You know those ones that they're building all over. Stack and pack housing, a gym and a mini Tesco. Don't need to go anywhere because the whole of your city is going to look the same. That's a vibrant community. Diversity means monoculture. It means no culture and no diversity whatsoever outside the paradigm of political correctness and self-conscious council-run events and the people in your local neighbourhood who've taken over the narrative of public opinion. Yet your public opinion has been taken over with no more than 10 or 20 people around the area that you live in. Look into that. Look at what's going on. Look at the school streets agenda. Yeah, that's been rolled out and that's going to go everywhere. So in our talk, The Bigger Picture, we reveal all this stuff. What's behind walkable cities, smart cities, city villages, etc. Agenda 21, now Agenda 2030, a global action plan implemented at a local level through UN and ICLEI, Local Council for Sustainable Development. Now, basically, your council and local community operates through what is now going to be called these mega regions. These are being formed with groups of councils all over the country. We've reported on this quite widely. Take a look. Happening a lot, especially up north. Look at councils that are being brought together with other councils. It's to take away all public input. And you try getting hold of anyone through a phone in a local council now, you can't do it. They've removed all the phone numbers. This happened years ago. You can no longer contact people in the council. I remember when I was going through all this with questioning council tax, I could have a debate with these people. They would actually write back to me, not anymore. You will get no answer from them whatsoever. And there's an army of them, and they're working against the public interest in many respects. So basically, yes, we have to look at where all this came from. 1983 World Commission on Environment and Development, chaired by Gro Harlem Brundtland. And a 1987 report named Our Common Future was published, defining sustainable development as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Basically, it's about a fake ideology of environmentalism to control all land. When they say environmental protection, they mean managing all land. When they say economic growth, they mean controlling all economic activity. When they say social equity, they mean no rights, collectivism over autonomy. And all this is achieved through legislation and group consensus. That word's very popular, consensus. It will implement draconian legislation, and huge amounts of money will be spent on mitigation and carbon offset. This is where the banks come in and where countries get bankrupting nations and bringing them under complete control. The same will happen to wealthy people and the wealth of all people. Banks will refuse to lend money to countries who do not comply. That's already been talked about. So basically, we can look now at organisations which train these people. One such organisation is Crown Agents. On their website, it states, our consultancy work helps nations, they work all over the world, helps nations achieve deep-rooted change in the institutions and systems that are vital for nations' prosperity and well-being. So what are they doing as an NGO in other countries? What are they doing putting in future leaders in other countries? It says we work with governments, NGOs, public and private sector organisations to develop successful leaders. Well, can't these countries develop their own successful leaders? And it says effective organisations and successful leaders through training and professional development programmes. What does that mean? Yes, programming them into the narrow corridor of accepted opinion, and everything outside it is a right-wing conspiracy theory. That's what they're doing all over the world. So it's not just here, you see. Well, basically, there's a quote from Manly P. Hall, who alluded to all of this kind of change agent mentality, and it came out of things like positive thinking and Think and Grow Rich and all this kind of stuff. And he said in 1928 that black magic has merely passed through a metamorphosis, and although its name be changed, its nature remains the same. This is a form of black magic, and black magic needs consent, contractual agreement, and that's where the climate catastrophobia religion comes in. You're doing this to save the world. Public opinion is controlled and steered in every part of the country and the rest of the world. So basically, this gets us on to the latest protest group, landjustice.uk. I've just been given this information, right hot off the press actually, and I've looked them up. And basically what they're doing is they're invading farms and private land up and down the country. And they're using the idea of the common good. You know the common good? The common good is the common good of the bankers, the World Bank, the IMF. The common good is for the state to take your property. The common good is to give it to the elites to close off. That's what the common good is. So these useful idiots are working for this agenda. It means state control under the UN Agenda 21 principles to take over the land. And that land will be closed off to the public if they have their way through their rewilding schemes. Just look at the rewilding schemes and look at the Wildlands Project and look what they wanted to do in America, turn 50% of America into a wilderness, which is fenced off, full of wild animals where you can't go. So if you live in the country, that's it. And that's what this is part of. So basically, it will be closed off to the public through their rewilding schemes and under their biodiversity plans, which restrict the public from entering any of their new wildernesses. So these idiots are causing trouble and friction between landowners and the public. So the public are going to say, yes, it's all ours. We want it back. Well, newsflash, it's not yours. It's going to be taken by the World Bank, the IMF, the International Conservation Bank under Agenda 21. Okay, this is nothing but a communist style, but remember what Dr. Day said, this is bigger than communism. It's a communist style land grab for the state, using fake protesters, some of whom are involved in the controlled opposition groups like Extinction Rebellion and Reclaim the Power. Yes, I've found out that it's the same people. So basically, this is what they say on their website. It's called Land Camp, Land Justice Land Camp. This is what they're doing. It says, it's time to take back control of the land we depend on. Well, they depend on it because farmers create produce on that land. That's why they depend on it. So why are they invading it? England needs a community right to buy, like now exists in Scotland. Now, you need to look this up because this is land grab. This is taking land. No, it's not taking land off wealthy owners to redistribute. It's taking land for the World Bank and the IMF and the global corporations to be administered under Agenda 21 administration, meaning you won't be allowed on it. These controlled opposition groups are the enemy of all who value freedom. What they're going to do is they're going to get lots more land closed off by trespassing, putting their stupid people on there, making litter everywhere, peeing all over the place, defecating all over the place and upsetting farmers. It says all this, it's time to take back control of the land we depend on. England needs a community right to buy, like now exists in Scotland. If the community in the Calder Valley were given control of Walshaw Moor, this is up north, they would manage it properly, slowing the flow of water downstream, restoring the land to ecological health and locking up carbon to address the climate emergency. Yes, these are the ideal, useful idiots. But for that to happen, it says politicians need to change the law. Yes, and that's what these people, these subversives, are doing. It's landjustice.uk. You need to tell everyone about this and get everybody aware of it. If you know any farmers, tell them about these people. And it says anyone thinking about this, about redistribution of wealth, needs to research Agenda 21. These are my notes I'm going through here. Now, the thing is, we've gone into quite a lot of detail here, but there's some intelligent posts on Facebook about this. I'm going to get to something which is extremely important, which this show's been building up to. And I hope it's not gone on too long, but there's some amazing information in there, right? Now, this is what these idiots are saying on Facebook. Alden Anthony James, a professional activist who has been basically confronting anybody and calling them a right-wing conspiracy theorist if they talk about 5G. He says, see you there if you're going, right? Yes, grazing land's ideal fertiliser is farmyard manure. It feeds the microbes and worms in the soil and adds humus, it says here, humus. But he says, fun and games with Farmer Giles. I don't think you needed to spray manure on grazing land, but I'm not a farmer. So these idiots have gone on to what they think is a private estate, which is many, many acres, near Hebden Bridge in Yorkshire. And guess what they've done? They've gone on to a tenanted piece of farmland with their idea to have a bit of a knees up in the Extinction Rebellion type knees up. In other words, let's all go shopping at Waitrose, leave all our litter everywhere, light fires, crap all over the place and ruin it and frighten the animals. Now, this is what happened, yeah? It says there's a lady who actually knows what's going on there, and she's said, oh, wait a minute, yeah. Let's get back to this. I've just found another bit. One of these useful idiot parasites has said, Land Justice Network occupation and camp set up for the weekend event at Hebden Bridge. Farmer not feeling the love at that moment. Think he may have softened his position somewhat after a spokesperson discussed the situation. So basically these idiots have gone onto his land and this is what happened. This is one of the ladies who's involved with the farm. She's put on their website, on their Facebook page. It says, crucial reading for those attending land camp. Please read before travelling to this gathering. This is a non-confrontational post. She's had to put that on, of course. This is a non-confrontational post, just facts, as there are some things you may not be aware of. 1. The camp has been set up without permission from the tenant farmer who rents and farms this land. The Land Justice Network have arrived unannounced and were uninvited. The farmer has requested the protest, in inverted commas, does not go ahead, and the campers to leave his land. However, this request has been declined. The inadequate laws regarding trespass offer little in the way of protection to this farmer, as the Land Justice Network knows. The Land Justice Network stated that the camp is on the Walshaw estate belonging to Richard Bannister. It is not. So they've got it wrong. A bit like Extinction Rebellion, they've got it all wrong because they're probably not even doing any research into what they're doing. They're a bunch of useful idiots who all got together on Facebook, being led by a change agent, and they've all gone down there to basically do nothing for the weekend and invade someone's land. He says they are mistaken. It's a different landowner. So they've gone onto a poor farmer's land, right? It says, therefore, the protest is taking place on the wrong land. This has been pointed out to the Land Justice Network. The Land Justice Network states that the land is abandoned farmland. This is incorrect. So they can't even look on the land registry. That's stupid. The land is part of a working sheep farm and is being used full time, as it always has, by the tenant farmer who pays to use this land to graze sheep, and it is not abandoned farmland. This error has been pointed out to the Land Justice group, right? The Land Justice Network. Yeah, okay. I'll have to go. The farm has been run by the same family for generations. They live and work there. They are extremely decent, gentle and compassionate people who, whilst wishing to keep a non-confrontational relationship with the LJN, have been shocked and distressed by the arrival of this camp on their farm. Already this has been greatly disrupted their daily farming routine. It's a huge invasion of their privacy and disruptive to their livelihood. Livestock has had to be removed and relocated because of the arrival of the camp. All extra work for the farmer and his wife. The sheep have been removed from the camping area. The cattle, including the bull, brought inside for the duration of the protest, incurring extra costs in food and bedding. Number 6. It's lambing time. If you need any explanation as to why this matters, then you really should not be coming out into the countryside, period. The protest will include people, vehicles, tents, music, performances and dancing, as well as digging of toilets. It is unclear how the Land Justice Network believes this to be in the best interest of the farm. Their statement, "We will leave the land in a better state than before," seems ironic. The noise and music will disturb and confuse the animals, the wild stock and the wildlife who are used to hearing nothing more than the sound of the curlew in his remote and normally peaceful area. Naturally, there is a concern that the noise will be detrimental to them. Point 9. The siting and suitability of this camp has been ill thought through. This is not a campsite you have been invited to, but a working farm. It's not geared to a large influx of people. There is rough terrain underfoot. There is a long, unmade single track leading to the farm. It would be doubtful an emergency vehicle such as an ambulance would be able to negotiate this. So, you good people, who clearly have the interests of farmers at heart, please consider whether a festival-style, in inverted commas, of course, protest, complete with music and dancing on a sheep farm, uninvited, is really the most appropriate way of supporting this cause. An online petition or letters to Parliament, for example, would cause no disruption to wildlife, livestock or farmer. I do hope the Land Justice Network will not remove this post in the interest of fairness to all, including potential attendees, who no doubt will wish to be able to make a fully informed choice on whether to attend or not. Now, I don't know whether that post has been removed, but this is really an indication of where these useful idiots are going. They're going to go onto private land where the poor farmers are trying to earn their living. They're going to destroy that land. They're going to do it on the back of bringing in draconian legislation, which the government will have to enforce to stop them going on the land. It's a little bit like the fake protest group set up through Occupy, the Bank of Ideas, which squatted a Swiss bank. Oh, how do you do that in the City of London? ? See our film Inside Occupy and the Bank of Ideas. And that changed the squatting laws. Okay, so all is this about, all is these idiots are doing is they're taking away more and more of your freedoms and ruining the lives of people. So that's it for this broadcast. I hope that was helpful and useful. Do listen to Windows on the World, go back into our archive. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you all soon on the tour, the Bigger Picture Tour, or listening on next week's show.
Let me
Join me, Mark Windows, for Windows on the World live every Sunday 9 to 11 p.m. GMT. Check out our archive and programme stream at windowsontheworld.net.